Pardon me while I preen just a quick second. I'm like a budgie. You put my reflection in front of me, whether it's a viewfinder or a mirror, and I'm just going to make sure that I look pretty all the time. Also, if you put a blanket over my head, I'll fall asleep. I'm testing out some new beard-based products that have been gifted to me by Cremo, a very nice men's shaving and grooming company. They have a great YouTube channel that I strongly recommend checking out if you want some proper professional advice on grooming and style. I've been trying to follow their advice on styling my hair because one day I'll sort this travesty out. I'm currently trying out Cremo's thickening beard cream, which is supposed to like add shape and reduce patchiness, two things I very much need right now, and I quite like it. With the volume boost, it's making the ginger in my beard more prominent, so it's like helping accentuate my Celtic roots, which of course brings me to the main subject of today's video. So months and months ago, I uploaded a video, a very typical narrative on my channel. Hang on a sec. I uploaded a video where I talked about wanting to make more content about like my identity as a Scottish person and discuss that a little bit more and try and like self-reflect, I guess, in a public forum, which is always a good idea. So I thought I'd start that off by talking a little bit about my experience as a Scottish person who has moved to London and has lived here for almost 6 years. Now, I've been trying to formulate the talking points of this video for quite a while, and it always ends up becoming very heavy and a little bit political, all that sort of stuff. These are subjects I want to cover eventually, but for like the first video, it'll get very, very heavy very quickly. So I think I'm just going to keep this very sort of simply based in my experiences in London, and other things can become part of a longer discussion in maybe more videos about this, maybe like a series. You guys know by now I'm very bad at actually like following through on like video ideas and series and things, so let's just say this is maybe a pilot for that sort of stuff. Today I'm just going to break down my London experience as a Scot in the past, the present, and the future. So obviously the first kind of question is like, why did I move here in the first place? What was the motivation? What was here that wasn't in Scotland? Truth be told, my motivations were a combination of personal and professional, I think. It was around 2013. Most of the people I knew and was close friends with and was collaborating with on a regular basis were all based here or thereabouts. I was in a relationship with someone who lived in London at the time, so that was a contributing factor, although they did leave and we did break up before I moved here, so that, let's not say that I moved here for them, it's fine. But I was in my third year of university in Edinburgh, and I was coming down here every second or third week, and I thought, I probably belong there at this point. At the time, it seemed like more of a make or break thing, like this is a huge step, I will give it a year, and if things don't work out, then I'll head home and try and figure things out there. But looking back now, and the way that I've basically managed to stay afloat here, that's probably the best descriptor for it. That definitely felt like a bigger step than it really needed to be. And I guess the other question when it comes to my move is, what is here that wasn't in Scotland at the time? And obviously hindsight is 2020, but looking back on it, there's not a lot that Scotland was lacking that, had I been the kind of person that I wish I was now, that I couldn't have just sorted out myself. Okay, because let's be honest, in 2013 I was at a point where I thought I can make it as a full-time content creator. In reality, I'd probably peaked about a year before, but let's not get into it. And unfortunately, at that time, I, to the best of my knowledge, was the only person I knew who was based in Scotland and was taking YouTube content and stuff like that as seriously as people in London and other parts of the UK and the world even. A lot of the Scottish creators I'd befriended and gotten to know earlier on in my career had all kind of given up, fallen off the wagon, gotten fed up with it, grown out of it, whatever you want to call it. They just weren't making content as actively, if at all. So I was at a point where it just felt like there wasn't a YouTube scene in Scotland, and instead of sticking around and building on it myself and trying to inspire more people to create more content in Scotland, I bailed and went to London. I'm sorry. I say sorry now because I know that there are a lot of really active Scottish creators now, and they're all pals with each other and collaborating and stuff, and I'm just sort of here on the sidelines kind of like, oh, I mean, I'm glad, it's good for you, but let's be pals. So if you are, by any chance, a Scottish creator who is watching this video, consider this me extending the hand of friendship. I want to know you more. I want to get to know you and watch your stuff. So let's fast forward a little bit to like now / the past couple of years. A question a lot of people often ask me is, how often do I manage to get back home? And the answer I always give is not as often as I'd like. I go home every year for Christmas, and that's usually about a week, maybe slightly less. And if time and budget allows, I'll try and get back up there a couple more times in the year. I currently haven't been home since Christmas. I do miss it terribly. My girlfriend and I are currently trying to plan a trip to get back up there in the next few weeks, but generally it feels like I'm not going back to Scotland half as much as I would really like to be doing. It's not even that far. It's a 4.5 hour train journey from King's Cross to Edinburgh. I used to take that train all the time. Now that I live on the other side of it, I'm not, and I feel kind of bad for that. But the reality is that's probably down to the fact that I spent the bulk of my 20s not only living here, but also building a life here. For 3 years, I had a full-time job that was essentially the building blocks of a career to which living in London would be a massive advantage. Pretty much all of my friends are here now, or at least are close. And I don't really talk to anybody socially who lives in Scotland anymore, except like a couple of people, which does make the idea of eventually maybe going back there at some point very scary. Although that is the ultimate goal, but I'll get to that in a bit. That's not to say I don't have any Scottish friends at all, especially while living in London. I have met a handful of other folks around here as well. My best friend from high school has moved here too and is also making a life here. But we all, and I've talked about this with some of them a little bit, have this kind of weird identity because of our different social circles. We tend to take on the role of the Scot in that social circle, which is definitely something I want to correct a little bit, and I think that having more friends from Scotland is definitely the way to go about that. People also do ask me if I consider myself a Londoner at this point. I've had a bit of a personal globalization crisis for as long as I can remember. People who have been around forever will remember in about 2012, I made a video where I was afraid that my accent was getting a little bit too soft. And obviously living in England, amongst primarily English people, but also amongst people from the US, from different parts of Europe, from Australia, I tend to emulate the conversation that is around me. Not to say that my accent is starting to sound too English in conversation, but that the, for lack of a better word, harshness of my native Scots tends to not be so prominent when I'm talking in conversation. I tend to get a little bit more rounded, a little bit more relaxed. Sometimes when people are talking to me for the first time, they might mistake me as Irish or American. And then when I start talking to them about, no, I'm actually from Scotland, but sometimes I get that my accent sounds a little weak, it starts to get stronger again, and then they realise. That's like the one major security I have with my identity as a Scot outside of Scotland, is just not presenting outwardly enough that I am from there. I'm pretty secure with my identity personally that I am a Scot. That's where I was born, that's where I was raised, that's where all my family's from, that's where I would call home if somebody asked. Which I guess brings me to the discussion of the future of my relationship with both London and Scotland. People have asked, do I see myself ever moving back? And yeah, of course I do. Like every fucking whimsical creative millennial, I have been toying with the idea of traveling a lot more in my 20s and living and working in different places. Canada has been on my mind for quite some time. There was some possibility of some places in Europe. But the long-term goal, after all of that, has been to settle down back in Edinburgh. That is a city where, after everything, still has my heart. Like, that's where I moved when I was 17. It's where I spent, like, my most formative years. Like, that's the person that I am today comes from the person that I learned to be when I was living there. And I don't think my business there is finished, and that is definitely where, after everything, I'm probably going to be settling down. And the closer I get to turning 30, aka 8 months, I'm starting to get a little bit more realistic, and maybe my dreams of traveling the world aren't going to be as attainable as they were before. It doesn't mean I'm not going to do it, but it definitely means that I might be moving back to Scotland sooner than I thought. But when I say that I do want to move back to Scotland, people often follow that up with asking me when, because, I mean, most of my friends are here now, and it would feel weird to just kind of abandon the life that I've made here just for the sake of being back in Scotland. Not to get too heavily into this, because I think I want to save this for a later video, but I think the biggest deciding factor for moving back to Scotland would be if another independence referendum was on the cards. Despite living in London and kind of building a life here and voting in London, most importantly, I do still believe that Scotland would be better off as an independent nation. And as I record this video, we are kind of getting to a boiling point where another independence referendum doesn't seem unlikely, especially in the build up to the UK leaving the EU. I think that if that process begins and there's more I can do to make that happen, and being in Scotland is the best way to do it, then that's probably going to be a big deciding factor. But again, that's a discussion for another time. For now, I guess it's just worth concluding that my business in London isn't quite finished, and still got a lot of plans to make before making another big move like that. People have also asked me, in the comparison from living in Scotland to living in London, if there are any big cultural differences, or if there's any discrimination or anything from being a Scot based primarily in the capital of England. I think I'm quite lucky in the fact that I do live in London, which in itself is a very metropolitan and a very diverse city, full of different cultures and creeds and races. I think if I'd chosen to move to a much smaller town or city in England, then my experience would be significantly different. But I've never faced any massive stereotyping or discrimination or anything along those lines. There is the money thing whenever I come back down from Scotland with Scottish notes. It's still a big pull-out. I don't get why it's such a thing still. And occasionally, not from anybody particularly that I'm very close to, but there's always just the odd, I guess the best word for it is microaggression. Just little ribbings that often play into the stereotypes that Scots are always angry and ready to fight and ready to drink you under the table. And it's not a big thing, but it is one of those things that does make me feel a little bit insecure if I feel the need to be cranky or something like that. So that's kind of my personal experience with living in London and being Scottish and all the things that come with it. I'm sorry if you came to this video looking for a guide to living in London. If you have questions about that sort of stuff, leave them in the comments and I can do a follow-up video of that sort of theme if that's what you're into. And also leave me follow-up comments to anything I've talked about here so that I can, if I want to expand on talking about national identity and being Scottish and stuff, if you have anything that you're curious about and want to know a little bit more, then feel free to let me know in the comments and I will happily expand on it in future episodes, maybe. Regardless, I hope that this was entertaining or interesting to you in some way and it wasn't just me waffling about myself for God knows how long. And of course, thank you if you managed to get this far. That's it from me for now. I think I'm going to edit this down, see how it actually sounds, and maybe from then I'll decide whether or not it's worth expanding on in future videos. Don't forget to check out and subscribe to Kremo's YouTube channel. The link is in the description and in the card. And my next video will probably be a more longer dedicated video with them. We're doing some stuff together, so keep an eye out for that. And if you have any suggestions for it, again, let me know in the comments. In the meantime, I will see you on a different social platform at some point, I am sure. Be good, have fun, see you soon.